Berserker. Modern romanticization defines them as a badass, undefeatable hero or a violent juggernaut. The arch-heathens of the Viking Age and pre-Viking Age saw berserks as a bad thing, akin to trolls. In fact, a later incarnation of Berserker were called Trollekin. The reality is that the gangr, the Berserker rage, can be a very heavy burden. It feels like a consistent adrenal rush just below the surface. Your instincts and perceptive senses are on a higher alert than the average person. It's like the parts of you that are dedicated to survival are turned up a few degrees. And without training, this can be a very negative thing. With training, however, it can be very useful. In my job, for example, I have the ability to read the more subtle things about a person that most people either ignore or overlook. But unchecked, a berserk can be volatile, aggressive, and somebody nobody wants to be around. The gangr has been compared to PTSD, IED, and other mental health issues. In my experience, these disorders have some similarity, but are not 100% accurate. While on one hand, my emotions in general are very strong, this isn't just anger. It can also be love, compassion, or even sadness. Pop culture berserkers. Predator, right? So there's this Berserker and Predator, one of the, I think they're called super predators. It's got the, I think it's supposed to be a xenomorph jaw on his helmet. I didn't really see too much in this character from what I remember of the movie that actually showed any correlation with actual Berserker in any way, shape, or form. They might have just thought it was a cool name. Corn Berserker. These are the furious, driven mad by the blood god Corn in the Warhammer 40k universe. If they don't shed blood and murder and collect skulls for the Skull Throne and all that, they feel like pain or discomfort or whatever. So they have to constantly be doing the murders, or else they just feel real bad about themselves. That kind of plays into the stereotype of being like super aggressive and super needing to shed blood and like murder and all that stuff. Werewolves can be another pop culture berserker or type of berserk. Ulfithnar, which is plural for Ulfithin, are the Norse equivalent. So there is some history to this, but the Christians amped it up with their being afraid and claiming that everything was the devil that was popularized in the Middle Ages. You still get a lot of those stereotypes of needing to shed blood and the ferocity and the beast within. That's a huge part of that. Definitely the beast within. Wolverine, the popular Marvel comic book superhero, longtime member of the X-Men. If you don't know who Wolverine is, welcome to society. He's all angry and whatnot. Again, he's got some of that beast within. He can't be harmed, which is kind of something you see a little bit in the lore. So that's not entirely without some kind of historical and mythological precedence. I believe that they probably gave the nickname Berserker to him after the creation of the character. The character was actually originally, and this is pretty funny, when he fought the Hulk in, I can't remember which comic book that was, during his first appearance, he was actually supposed to be mutated Wolverine, an actual Wolverine. Thankfully he's not, because they think the character's better. Guts from Berserk, the anime Berserk. I remember watching this, and I think most of the reason they call it Berserk is because he's just got this big-ass sword and murders an army of people, and that's just kind of a thing with him. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been like years since I've seen that, but yeah, not a whole lot of actual cognate there. I guess you could kind of draw some correlation between him and the warrior at Stamford Bridge that held off the army on the bridge until he was snuck attacked by a couple of people that decided to come underneath in a boat and get him from the bottom. You'll see a lot of these like themes in various different berserks. There's even a couple of like really strange ones out there. Popular role-playing game kind of character. It's all over the place. Not that I don't appreciate seeing like that kind of character. So sometimes it's fun to play. Sometimes it's fun to dive in and kind of let loose. It was Too Human, which had a berserker class. The entire game was actually kind of an interesting use of Norse mythology to create a mythos. It was pretty fun. So it's not like these are entirely without merit. But a lot of these also come with the myths about the aggression or I'll kind of go over later, the shadow aspects of the human mind. I just wanted to show people how to write it in runes. Honestly, the Elder Futhark's pretty easy to learn. If you just look at the script and start writing in it. Taught myself by writing in a story. Just kind of wrote a story with the runes. There's a lot of bad information on Berserker and Ulfithin and Ulfithnar, which is the plural of Ulfithin. As I said, Vin and not Din. A lot of it is people over romanticizing and just thinking it's some kind of like badass thing, when in reality it was probably our ancestors dealing with a certain like mental conditions that they didn't necessarily understand. Don't think that the condition of being berserk is necessarily a negative thing, and like most things in Norse mythology, it's probably a term used indiscriminately. For example, troll tends to be somebody that's otherized. Like we today in modern society would probably consider homeless people to be troll because they're on the outside of society, they're like dirty, they're otherized. It's them over there, those homeless people, those transients, those dirty people, whatever you want to call them. Today we have a more accepting understanding of the homeless, but I'm sure back then they probably would have considered them troll. And you see that otherization a lot in Norse mythology. Definitions are never 100% clear. It's kind of more of a feeling of this is the thing rather than like a Webster's actually analyzed definition. Some people today consider themselves berserk or Ulfithin, or just use the term berserker to mean all of it. I personally identify with that category of people. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form I have kind of supernatural abilities or anything. It's just a predilection towards certain behaviors, and kind of like I explained in the first part of this, I have this like this adrenal rush just sort of waiting under the surface. And my entire life, I've had to deal with heightened emotion, just in general, the certain characteristics that kind of come with what a lot of the lore says Berserker are. There was a book that I read a while back, and if you're at all interested in any kind of Berserker, or you believe that you have the predilections as well, I highly recommend it. It's called Putting on the Wolfskin. I will put a link in the description below. I believe I got mine from Amazon, and Wayland Skallagrim is the author. Him and a group of other like-minded individuals, not necessarily of a northern persuasion. He references a Maenad in there. Maenads are, to give it kind of a northern perspective definition, berserks of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine. Obviously had predilections and decided to buy the book, and honestly when I was reading it, I was like, holy crap, this like marks all the freaking boxes. Some of the things in the book that I have also encountered in my life are the training that's necessary. And honestly, everybody, no matter what walk of life you come from or choose, can benefit from things like meditation and martial arts and studying various philosophies and just all those things that really turn people into better people. It's kind of going to be the theme of this video. Not only what a berserker is, but how to deal with a lot of the predilections of being berserk. So first, more about myself, kind of give you sort of a base of where I'm coming from. If you watch my videos, you know I like to put personal stuff at the end, but this is relevant. So I had kind of a turbulent life growing up. Both parents had addiction issues, and I've heard worse stories. My parents always showed me love. They just weren't the greatest at making adult choices. I also had my grandparents there to be a more solid foundation in life. I moved around a lot. I had to deal with having very strong emotions, and honestly didn't have a whole lot of coping mechanisms. And that's something else that's pretty important. And coping mechanisms are also very important for, life in general, but especially if you're of a berserker persuasion, or Somathera, as Wayland Skallagrimson calls it. Dealing with the actual emotional impact of the gangr itself. Gangr and berserker gang are the term for the fury itself. Gangr comes from, it just means like to walk, to journey. In fact, one of the alternate names for Odin is Gangleri, which means wanderer. It'd be a really cool name if it wasn't for the Larry part. I think that's where the gangrel come from, if you ever played WoD. pretty much pro wrestling from the 90s memories. So one of the things that keeps coming up, like if you research it, is like shamanism and associating berserker with shamanism, and there's this whole like what do you call it, the flyarmaic? I don't know. It's the red mushroom with the white little sprinkles. That one didn't grow year round. Two made people sick. Honestly, doesn't make sense. But it's entirely possible that berserks, which were part of an Odinic cult, would partake in certain things that modern shaman do. The term shaman comes from Tengrism. So their high god is the great blue sky. His symbol's the double-headed eagle, and he is actually, according to Proto-Indo-European linguists, is associated with Tyr, Tiwaz, and also Zeus, Deus Peter, is the older Pi name, Proto-Indo-European, PIE, Pi language. So shaman are actually their priests. They would be the Gothi / Vitki, to give it a connection to the Norse. Gothi being the Norse priest and Vitki being the Norse sorcerer. Back in the day, white European anthropologists were like, shaman? That's what they call these guys? Let's call everyone else in the world that's even similar shaman. Kind of become the term. Maybe someday a better term will come along and Tengrism will be like, that's ours. But for now, it's just kind of the term that everybody understands. So for me, I've never really, I've done guided meditation. I've never really done any drugs, to be honest. I've never even smoked pot. I didn't drink till I was 22 and a half. I'm kind of boring, I guess. So for me, it's been more dealing with and directing that emotional energy, that rage that exists within. And it can be directed toward positive things. And that's really kind of what I'm getting at with the video. Hence why it's called being berserker, not what is a berserker. When you grow up berserk and looking at my life, it's entirely possible that it's a reaction to a lot of the things that were around me. But I think that, my father also has some of the predilections. So I don't think it's necessarily 100% environment. I think it's kind of a blend of nature and nurture that creates somebody with the gangr inside of them. So how did I deal with it? I mean, martial arts was a big thing for me. A lot of berserks that I've talked to have had some kind of draw toward the martial aspects, whether it's martial arts or maybe street fighting. I was about 9 years old when I first got into martial arts. And first it was Taekwondo. I was decent at it, but didn't get too far, partly because of the financial status of my family, but also it just wasn't something that really thrilled me. It wasn't until I was about 14 years old that a very good friend of mine got me into weightlifting. And then I, as a skinny, angry at the world child, was able to direct that anger towards something more positive. And all of a sudden I was like, whoa, I can do something about my life. I can make myself better. And that was kind of the ball that got life rolling. Had I not met that friend of mine, I'm not really sure what my life would be like, to be honest. And then when I was about 15 years old, that same friend was like, hey, I was about to go meet this girl down at the library. My friend was like, hey, when you're there, can you pick me up the Tao of Jeet Kune Do? And I was like, okay. But anyway, long story short, I eventually picked up the book for myself. And it was that spark that got me more serious about martial arts. And I started reading as many books as I could. And obviously the training that I had gotten when I was much younger helped. And it was eventually what led me down to the path of reading the Hagakure and the Book of Five Rings. I'll see if I can find some links to those as well. Hagakure, if you've ever watched the Forrest Whitaker movie, Ghost Dog Into the Samurai, the little clips of that in there. That was what really got me into Eastern philosophy, and I started reading about Zen, and I started actually meditating, and then from there, a few years go by, about 20 when I joined the Marine Corps. If you watched my What is a Gothi video, I talked a little bit about that. That's when I found Ausatru and heathenry in general. And obviously the training as a Marine made me a little bit angrier in some ways. Being told what to do with no choice is pretty uncomfortable, not gonna lie. But at the same time, due to that training, I now know that no matter what situation I get into, I will be able to improvise my way out of it. I've mentioned work, but I haven't really mentioned what I do. I'm in security. We don't have a lot of the same protections that law enforcement does. I'm not 100% sure on what the rules for law enforcement with that are, but I've definitely seen them be like, well, you come with us. I can't do that. I can't go hands-on unless somebody is attacking somebody else, attacking myself, or damaging property. And that last one, I'm always going to try to verbally command them to stop first, because they have rights. I can't violate those rights just like anybody else in this country. For me, going into a situation and being able to improvise super fast is pretty important. And that's something that the Marine Corps gave me as well. In the Corps, we have a martial art called MCMAP. It stands for Marine Corps Martial Arts Program. And I have a green belt in that. Starts off with tan, then it goes gray and then green. So it's nothing too fancy. The reason it's not white is because white is not a tactical color. And that's kind of the long and skinny of my journey as far as what's gotten me into martial arts. I mean, I gotta say it's helped. I do have like a lot of nervous tics. I mentioned in a video prior that I eat my fingernails. Well, I also do this thing where I play with my hair like this. And I've never seen anybody else that ever does that. I don't know. If somebody does, like comment, because I'd be curious if there's actually like a name for it. It just seems to be something that kind of calms me down, which probably makes me look like a weirdo out in public, but I just like the noise. I think a lot of the tics come with just that energy buildup of being berserk. If you notice this character that I've drawn here that's in the opening part of this video has the symbol of chaos on the face. And that's not like some kind of Warhammer thing. That's, if you're into Warhammer and you know nothing else about the world, honestly, it's a symbol of chaos. It's been used. It started out in a book called Eternal Champion. It's the forces of chaos in it. Have the 8-pointed sphere, and then the order have the up-pointing arrow, which is interesting because this is also the rune of Tyr, and Tyr is the god of sky and balance. And if you were to make a bind rune with that, you would actually get the symbol of chaos. And I don't know if that's intentional in any way, but I thought it was pretty interesting. So the symbol of chaos on the face actually represents that like primal energy. It's kind of what it feels like. It's like this force, this energy that you can like tap into. I tap into it when I'm doing long shifts. It can like help you keep going and stay motivated. It really just takes a lot of practice to just kind of focus that inner energy you have on tasks. You can use it to maybe lift a little harder in the gym, push yourself with it. It's just kind of an innate thing that berserkers can tap into. And the character was just something that I made like, I want to say late high school. No, I think it was about 19 actually. So just after high school. Called him the Berserker. So I figured it would be fitting to throw in this video. So some myths about being berserk. Mushrooms. No. 1, they make people sick, and 2, you're not gonna fight if you freaking took some hallucinogenics. Maybe something like, what's that one? LSD? No. PCP? PCP. PCP is that one that, people are all hopped up. I'm not an expert on drugs, but I'm pretty sure that's synthetic, and the Norse didn't have it. And I don't believe that, what is it? Armaic? Something like that. It's that red mushroom with the white speckles on it. That's what they think that the Berserker used before combat. And it's entirely possible that Berserker groups used hallucinogens the same way that shaman would, but it is extremely doubtful that they would eat something that, 1, only grows part of the year, and 2, would make them extremely sick right before battle. Same thing with alcohol. Alcohol is another myth. It's a downer, and again, can make you throw up. It was more likely that it's a trance. I talk about the adrenal rush that I get. It kind of expanding on that, giving into that, is what creates that berserker rage. The gangr. Just kind of means journey, like walk. The opter gangr, which Jackson Crawford actually does a pretty decent video on, means after walker. Gangleri, which is another name for Odin, means wanderer. Again, from personal experience, it's more like just being in touch with your primal side. You're in touch with that animal part of you. The wolf has always been very prominent in me. I grew up with a wolf for the first 7 years of my life, and that was like my grandfather actually raised wolves for a minute before I was born. So we had this female wolf named Nikki. So I've always felt a very strong connection to wolves. So for me, I'm just really getting in touch with that animal side. And that's another thing, is a lot of modern society, we tend to shun that side. We tend to shun the wolf within, or the bear within, or the boar within, if that's your totem. Really, I think it's more of a psychological thing than necessarily physiological. There are some physical characteristics, broad shoulders, Neanderthal-like foreheads, that tend to come with being berserk. It's mostly psychological. It's mostly being almost naturally attuned to that more animalistic side of yourself. And there's really nothing wrong with it. Obviously, there's some negative connotation there, and like I said in the beginning, if you don't hone these predilections, or if you repress them, they will end up controlling you. It's a simple cliche of, if you don't control your emotions will control you. It's not necessarily rage. It's, in my experience, berserks tend to love stronger. They tend to be more prone to emotions, more prone to sadness. I wouldn't say I was ever on the level of clinical depression, but I've been depressed. The other thing that berserks have is emotional content. That emotional energy within, it's almost like this free energy. It's this chaotic energy that we can tap into and use it for other things. Use it as an energy burst. Again, in my job, sometimes the hours are insane. Right now I'm a manager, and I have to fill in for whoever at random times of the night. And this is in part actually due to being in the Marine Corps, but it's also in part due to this natural ability to just tap into this energy source that not a lot of people have. I can, push for longer. And now for something completely different. The spiritual side of Berserker. You can see I put Odin on what is my right, Fenrir on my left. So these are probably the two major archetypes for me as Berserk. Obviously with Odin, you get a lot of the wisdom. He inspires fury, but he also tries to take what he knows and uses it for something very useful. Fenrir tends to be more rage, tends to be more anger, tends to be a bit more aggressive. There's kind of a balance here. See, they're kind of two opposing forces in the lore as well. Fenrir was one of the things that got me into heathenry, to Norse paganism. Same thing with the Berserker in general, and then that of course led me to Odin, who, upon studying, I realized that I had a lot of those qualities. So while I consider myself an Odinsman, Fenrir is definitely a very, very important archetype for me. Historically, and pertaining to the lore specifically, Odin has a lot of reference to the Berserker, even going so far as to calling them Odin's men. At least one theory that Fenrir may have been an expansion on the Christian idea of a Hellmouth.
I don't think Fenrir being an expansion of Christian lore makes any sense, in part because in Slavic mythology you have Simargl, which actually has a lot of similarities. Hound of the Apocalypse, who's bound, etc. And then in Egyptian mythology you have Wapuet, which is the opener of ways, and he was actually a wolf-headed god of war. Fenrir, the name, means fen dweller, and fen are swamps. Swamps, for at least pagan Europeans, were seen as in-between places. At least I theorize that Fenrir, in an older incarnation, an origin with both Simargl, Wapuet, probably even Arcosius of the Goetia, the Lesser Keys of Solomon. There's probably an origin there, maybe even to the Howling God in the Ainu mythology. It's one of the reasons I refer to gods as archetypes, because they're staples in the human mind, and I'm going to expand upon this in a future video.
Yeah, and once I found Odin, I started to realize that archetype had followed me my whole life, that god had been there. I always kind of remember this old man. I don't know if it was specifically an Odin thing, but I recall when I think I was about 18, I do remember kind of waking up to the word half-sheathed wizard, and I looked over my shoulder, because I'm laying down, right? As I looked over my shoulder, and I remember seeing a red face of an older male with a beard. I just was like, oh shit, just went back to sleep, and just ignored that the thing was there, and I was fine. But that always stuck with me, that half-sheathed wizard, the Senex. Odin is the wise man. He's your Obi-Wan Kenobi, or if you go further back into Star Wars, your Qui-Gon Jinn. In fact, I think Qui-Gon actually a little bit more accurate. But kind of the archetype of Odin. He's the wise old man. He gives the sword to the hero Volsung in that saga. You know, that's kind of what Odin is he's that spark of wisdom, that hooded or hatted wanderer who kind of pulls at the strings of the story. So he has ulterior motives in the lore. He's preparing for this ultimate doom of the gods, and that's one of the reasons that's given anyway to why he inspires the Berserker fury. Because Odin, Oath, O-Th, not a T-H, O-Th. Oath means fury. So Odin means furious one, or the one who inspires fury. It doesn't just necessarily obviously mean anger or rage. That can also be passion, inspiration. In the putting on the wolfskin, one of the things Wayland mentions is the eureka moment, that aha moment. Like, I can attest that in most situations, the solutions will come to me pretty fast. You know, again, that's partly due to training, but I don't have any doubt that it's also due to how I'm hardwired. Now, Fenrir would be more the shadow. The shadow is the archetype of the oppressed, of the unwanted aspects in yourself. Star Wars is like one of the easiest freaking things to reference as far as like the archetypes go, because it's so exact to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which is built on Carl Jung's psychological theory about the archetypes. And the shadow would be your Darth Vader, or even to a certain degree your Han Solo. You know, people that are on the outskirts of what society deems as okay, or the villain has all these dark aspects that society says aren't okay. Now, in a modern psychological sense, this would be a lot more of your id type thing. I mean, anger, rage, that's a pretty blatant one, especially with the topic of Berserker. What was Fenrir? Exactly. He was this massive, aggressive wolf who was so large and powerful that the gods feared him. And then, you know, obviously the prophecy of Dvorva, the witch that Odin had necromantically spoken to in order to get this prophecy about Ragnarok. She was the one that mentioned about Fenrir eating him, also inspired that fear. With this archetype, you have your anger, he inspires fear. He's just this massive wolf. Wolves, very often in Western society and culture, have been vilified, have been equated to being like the devil or whatever. Obviously, the Inquisition was fond of murdering people that were probably having mental health issues that were deemed werewolves, when in reality, they had just some psych issues. That's the other thing, is that the shadow aspects tend to be very feared. Let's look at the archetype of the Berserker. You know, what do we see the Berserker as? Well, in certain pop culture, we see anger, aggression, monstrous power. In, God, what was that? Gears of War. I've never really played Gears of War. It's not my style of game, but they're these heavily armored things that you fight at some point in time, and they're called Berserker, and they are beholden to the alien queen or whatever. That's kind of the stereotype. It's that aggressive juggernaut, right? In 40K, you have your corn berserkers, and they're not happy if they're not murdering. That stereotype, right? Those are the shadow aspects. Something that people fear. That's something society fears. I think it's probably pretty prominent that berserkers in the real world, they probably feel a little estranged from most society, because we tend not to be very understood folks, or maybe outcast a little bit. Heck, the guys that I deployed with, I wasn't nearly as close to those guys as I was to some of the other guys I deployed with from other states. That's a whole other story. And yeah, and you know, sometimes you're just a little bit different than everybody else. Maybe you're a little bit odd. And especially if you haven't taken the time to find those coping mechanisms, to do that meditation, to practice martial arts, to get that aggression out. And that's the other thing with martial arts. It can inspire confidence. Like, I was actually talking to one of my employees the other day, and he's got a heavy martial arts background. And because we have that, we are more confident going into a situation. I'm less likely to be aggressive because I know that I can handle myself if a situation arises Whereas somebody who doesn't have that confidence will be more likely to be fearful and make a mistake. Maybe you're shaking because you're agitated, or adrenaline starts kicking in a little bit because that like fight or flight system's kind of going. Whereas those of us who are more confident in those abilities tend to not fly off the handle so easily. And I can say that the only times I have ever gone hands-on in my profession is because somebody else got it to that point. It was probably maybe 1 or 2 times I can think of that it was actually the subject we were dealing with that had aggressed. The people dealing with it didn't deal with it properly or didn't know how to deal with it properly, because not everybody has that confidence or that ability to improvise and calm things down. Sitting in a meditative position. I'm pretty sure that being berserker also comes with OCD, because not having the lines there would me. Okay, sitting in a comfortable position is pretty important. The hand position that I drew here, having your thumbs and your hands resting on each other. This. It's actually a pretty decent gauge of how well you're doing. If you're focusing too hard, your thumbs go up. If you're not focusing hard enough, your thumbs go down. And then obviously breath. Breath is pretty important. So that's the thing you're focusing on. And this is just a basic meditation. I would say get this pretty down before you start going into other things. You want to make sure you have proper spine alignment. You're sitting with your shoulder blades back, your hands in this position, laying on right just below what the Japanese call the hara, which is located just below the belly button. It's a little belly button. And they consider that like where your chi comes from. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a good reference point. And you'll notice that the spine actually, from a profile, curves like this. And something that I learned when I was in Buddhist services, as well as school for kinesiology, is in order to align your spine, stretching is pretty important. So you might bend over all the way, lean over all the way, and just slowly raise up like that. That'll kind of help you get your spine to be a little bit more in alignment. And that's also really important to get those scapula kind of pulled back. Your scapula, your shoulder blades. Your scapula back, and you're focusing on breathing. So the other thing, focusing on breathing in deeper from the stomach and then the chest. So your stomach fills first, then chest, and then you release it naturally. When you first inhale, you're filling your stomach and then your chest, and then you're just kind of relaxing and letting it all go out. And then kind of push a little bit toward the end just to get it kind of all out. And then you breathe back in. The reason that you're doing this is because you have the diaphragm, right? So the diaphragm is the muscle that pulls your lungs. Draw a lung, and so you have this muscle down here. This is your diaphragm, and that's pulling your lungs. Well, up here, you have a lot of people use this muscle for a primary thing. It shouldn't be done. All right, so that's kind of a part of the human body there. So you have these muscles right in here. These little guys that I put in red, those are called your scalene. Their secondary function is to actually lift the chest so that air can be let into the lungs. You want to be practicing on using your diaphragm. So that's why you're opening your stomach up. You might have a little bit of belly whenever you first inhale. So it's stomach, then chest, then out. And you're just focusing on this. Like I used to say to myself, like, in with the good air, out with the bad, in with the good air, out with the bad. And I would just focus on this, and you just let other thoughts drift by like clouds. Just don't pay attention to them. They're there, but don't give them thought. Like, don't let your inner monologue focus on that thing. Just kind of let it float on by. And honestly, if you do this enough, you get to the point where your mind is truly clear. It's actually pretty creative. But doing this is just one of the techniques that I use. Not that I have too much time these days to do it, to calm myself. Also, just getting out energy, lifting weights, being a little bit more active, because there is a physical energy that you need to get out. If you let that energy stagnate for too long, that's when you feel more agitated. That's when you're prone to your little tics a little bit more. It's really important to deal with that energy that you have in you as a berserker, Ulfidin or Maynad or whatever you call yourself as a Soma Fera.
Tell me if there's anything I missed, anything you disagree with, please comment below. I'd rather be proven wrong than stay wrong. Like, subscribe, do the thing. Be better tomorrow than you were yesterday. We are the sum of our actions. Skull.